Good morning, and thank you all for coming. I'm Stephen Aldstadt with SCOPE in New York. That's the Shooters Committee on Political Education. The New York SAFE Act continues to be the primary gun rights issue in New York State, which stands for the Secure Ammunition and Firearms Enforcement Act. Say what you will about the gun grabbers in New York, they are good at marketing. There have been several things introduced at the state level this last year, most notably mandatory storage laws and gun owner insurance. And we saw several local municipalities pass mandatory storage laws, most recently the capital city of Albany. But after the backlash from the passage of the SAFE Act, the slim Republican majority in the New York State Senate didn't really have the stomach to pass any more anti-gun legislation, so most of these things were dead on arrival in the Senate this year. The Republicans barely recaptured the majority in last November's election, and they're not eager to further arouse the angry upstate gun owners who could easily knock them right back out of the majority in the next election in 2016. The New York SAFE Act changed 54 different sections of the New York state law. It was one of those things you have to pass it to find out what was in it, as Nancy Pelosi would say. And many of the parts of this were directly related to suspension and revocation of pistol licenses, removing judicial discretion, and mandating placing people on a list of prohibited persons laws. And many of those provisions go far beyond the federal standards under USC 922G. You need to understand that in New York State, the baseline position is that it is illegal to possess a firearm. Now, New York has its own unique definition of what a firearm is. They say that it's pistols, revolvers, short-barreled rifles and shotguns as defined under the National Firearms Act, and assault weapons. There are some exemptions under New York State penal law, such as for law enforcement or people who have a license to carry a pistol. The New York State pistol licensing system is, it's May issue, and applicants are required to show cause why they should be allowed to have a license. Other than law enforcement, no possession of firearms is permitted, even in the home, without a license. Policies on the restrictions of time, place, and under what conditions that you're allowed to carry vary widely from one county to the next. Another of the major provisions of the New York SAFE Act is that if you ever become ineligible for your pistol license, then all firearms, rifles, and shotguns will be confiscated by the state. New York State is essentially working to classify more and more people as prohibited persons, and in many cases with little or no due process. In targeting pistol license owners, they're essentially disarming what is demonstrably the most law-abiding section of the community, and as John Lott has told us, up to 6 times more law-abiding than the law enforcement community. If you have the legal and financial resources to fight it, you can challenge it in the court after the fact, but in many cases, you're basically innocent until you can, or guilty until you can prove yourself innocent, and your Second Amendment rights are stripped and gone for good. 2.5 years after the passage of the SAFE Act, a number of provisions are still not in place. The SAFE Act mandated background checks and an ammunition database be kept for every transaction of ammunition. The state thought that they could use the federal NICS system to do the background checks. After they found out that the federal law prohibited this, they charged the New York State Police with developing a system. Well, a couple years later, and many millions of dollars, the state police are nowhere near having a system developed, and they're not likely to anywhere in the near future. At the end of this year's legislative session, the Senate, leaders in the Senate and the governor's office put out a memorandum of understanding saying that it's basically on hold for the foreseeable future. The Senate Republicans tried to portray it as a great favor they were doing to gun owners by not going forward with this, but the majority of New York gun owners could see right through that, and they understood what it was is basically an admission that they passed a law that they don't have the capacity to enforce or implement. Another provision of the SAFE Act mandated that New York State pistol licenses be recertified every 5 years. Now, probably to most people in this room, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but for close to 100 years, pistol licenses have been issued in New York State good until revoked, or essentially lifetime licenses. This means that in January of 2018, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 million existing pistol licenses will need to be recertified. This is bound to be a bureaucratic nightmare. So the New York State Police began working with up to 7 counties to try to develop a pilot program to start recertification early. After many months and fits and starts of the program, most of the counties dropped out in frustration with dealing with the state police, and 3 counties decided they were going to go forward with the project: Albany County, Fulton County, and Schenectady County. The idea was that they would start in February of this year, send out 500 letters to pistol license owners in each county, and get them to start recertifying their licenses early. Shortly after that was announced, Fulton County Sheriff Tom Laurie came out with a statement and told the people, if you get one of these notices, throw it straight in the trash. It's, you don't have to do it by law. These letters were supposed to go out for this pilot program in February. Here we are late September, and we haven't heard another thing about it. So don't know where that stands or what's going to go on with that. Lastly, I want to talk about the registration of assault weapons in New York State. The SAFE Act classified, greatly increased the number of guns classified as assault weapons in New York State, and mandated that if you have one of these guns now classified as an assault weapon, you had to register it with the state police. The deadline for that was April 15th of 2014. Once the deadline passed, many organizations, including ours, many news organizations, including the New York Times and many others, tried to find out, well, how many people registered their guns? How many guns were registered? State police refused adamantly to give out any of that information. We went forward with Freedom of Information Act request and a lawsuit. Nearly a year later, we won a court case, and they had to release that data. Bottom line, the number of guns now classified as assault weapons that were registered with the state police was 44,485, which sounds like a big number, but put it in perspective. The number of guns classified as assault weapon in New York State is estimated at least 1 million. That's a compliance rate of less than 4.5%. Now, many of those who registered were likely law enforcement who had no choice because of their position in law enforcement, and the compliance rate for the New York City, Long Island area was much higher than the rest of the state. So in the rest of the state, upstate, north and west of Westchester County, we're looking at a compliance rate of probably about 1 to 2% at the most. And I just want to close by saying we have to stop talking about law-abiding gun owners, because when the laws get so bad and so restrictive of your rights and so infringed by a government that people feel doesn't represent them, they stop obeying the law. We have to start talking about peaceable citizens or honest or ordinary citizens. In New York State, the compliance, non-compliance with the SAFE Act and the civil disobedience to this law was nearly universal by New York gun owners. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just needed